Hello, and welcome to episode 442 of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. My name is Seth Parrott, historian and deputy director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum. And with me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, retired Navy Captain Bill Tody, former skipper of the fast attack submarine USS Indianapolis, Commodore Submarine Squadron 3 in Pearl Harbor, and many others. How are you this Friday at 1541, Bill?
It's 1641 where I am, Seth, on the East Coast, and I'm doing fine, and I want to push my friend Michelle Assad's new book, Getting Off the X. Michelle and her husband were both CIA agents, and this book is about making sure that you're not at the place where the bomb blows up, and it's a fascinating story. They worked in Iraq for a long time, and if you want to read a good book, this is the one to get. About nothing to do with World War II, Seth, but modern day anti-terrorist operations is one of the best.
Sounds cool to me. With us, as usual, is our good buddy, Jon Parshall, historian Jon Parshall. How are you this fine Friday afternoon, Jon?
I'm well.
You're better now.
You don't sound well, Jon.
It's going to be fine. It's all going to be fine. It's going to get better.
It's all gravy, baby.
That's right.
And with us, he's been with us for the last several Q&As, and he's with us again today, and he's going to be with us again next season, which is, by the way, just so everybody knows, this is the last episode of season 4, and we'll get to more on that later. But my good friend, my oldest friend in the world, retired United States Army cavalry officer, retired Major Shawn Bergstrom. How are you today, my brother?
I'm good to go. It's a beautiful day here in the Panhandle of Florida. It's a beach day, as we would call it. But where would you rather be than on a beach than maybe with my boys doing some unauthorized history podcast?
There you go. So as I was saying, this is the last episode of season 4. This is episode 442. We haven't done 442, but that's just what we're saying. This is the next few weeks that are coming up. We got a couple of placeholder episodes as Bill and I start to prepare for the next season, season 5. And the first episode of season 5 will be in several weeks. We're doing this now. So Shawn, this is the Q&A, the final Q&A of this season. You got the helm, baby. All you.
Commodore, do I have the con?
You have the con.
So in the future, as always, I always say 2-3 sentences, get to the point, tell me who you are. And what I also like is tell me where you're writing from. We'd like to know where the audience is. Cool. So if you're in Siberia, say, hey, I'm in Siberia. So that's always a neat little aspect to it. So
hey, before you get started, because this is a Pacific War history show, I need to point out that both Jon and I are drinking Mai Tais. So the last episode we drank, or a Q&A episode, we drank the sink packs. These are Mai Tais.
Yes.
I don't know about your recipe, Jon, but mine's the original 1944 recipe. So I'm going full throttle World War II era.
Do you make your own orgeat syrup? As I
usually do, but I did not this time.
Okay, well then I have the moral high ground because mine is homemade orgeat syrup.
Yeah, but what kind of rum did you use though? Rums plural.
That's a
4 different rums in this. I'll have you know.
So the
most
recipe
of them
calls for 2.
That's fine. Whatever. I've got 3 different kinds of plantation, and then a little Lemon Heart 151 mixed in there as well. Yeah,
I got 2 shots of Martinique and 2 shots of Myers and the orgeat, and then of course lime juice and orange curacao. So
yeah, that sounds very similar to what we're doing here. So
tis a goodie. All right.
So Shawn, first question is, what is your favorite rum?
I like the Plantation 20th anniversary for sipping. My wife is also very fond of Eldorado 12 year. I make old fashions that are half bourbon, half Eldorado 12 year, and they're quite yummy. Seth?
There is a sort of halfway Cuban rum called Matasalem, and it's a dark, very, very, very sugary rum. I'm not a really sugary drink kind of a guy because I call it headache juice. It just instant. That's why I don't drink margaritas. But it is a good sipper. It is a really good sipper. It's super, super smooth, and I mean, it's like you're drinking freaking cane syrup. It's
not too funky.
No, not at all. Not at all. It doesn't have a stank to it. It's
okay.
It's pretty tasty if you find it.
Okay.
Anyway.
All right.
When I was in the Navy, my Royal Navy friends used to push Royal Old Pussers on me.
This stuff is pretty strong. I can't deal with it. Gotta say.
But yes, I developed a taste. Now I'm not saying this. Some people say I developed a taste for it meant they were overindulging. I was not. But there's this rum from Barbados that I have downstairs. It's like sipping rum. It's really good. You refrigerate it, kind of like good vodka. But yeah. I can't remember the name of it. It's just it's the old granddad of rums.
There we go. There you go. All right, let's do this thing. I need a question. I'm getting twitchy.
I mean, I like Zaya 12. Just that's me. But slow your roll, John. I'm in command. I'm in charge.
Sorry, man.
Let's go, man.
Type A. Twitchy.
You have the con.
Yeah.
All right. Dave from Bryan, Texas asks, gentlemen, one of the things Admiral King has been criticized for is not allocating enough escort ships to protect ship in the Atlantic after the U.S. joined the war and well into 1942. How would it have affected U.S. efforts in the Pacific, especially the Guadalcanal campaign, if Admiral King had sent more DDs and Diaz to the Atlantic? Love your show. Hope to get to see at least some of you at the Nimitz Museum's annual symposium in 2025.
I have an answer for that, but go ahead, John.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've wanted to talk about Paukenschlag. Yeah, in fact, Seth will confirm that I've sent him texts so often. I'm like, Paukenschlag. Let's talk about Paukenschlag. I don't think King was in any position to send any more escorts to the Pacific. He had a hair on fire emergency on the Atlantic and was desperate for as many escorts as he could get there. My biggest beef around the whole portrayal of Paukenschlag, which tends to be very anti-King, obviously, because it was kind of a tanker holocaust on the East Coast. But a lot of that criticism tends to come from British authors and people like Michael Gannon, who wrote Operation Drumbeat, which I thought was just
amazing,
sensationalist garbage.
I thought it's a good, that one or Torpedo Junction. I'm thinking of Torpedo Junction. That's an amazing.
Yeah. Okay. The bottom line is that King had a lot of things that he had to get done in the first half of 1942. He had a lot of balls in the air. And one of the most important of those was to escort troop transports that were going over to Britain, because the British were screaming bloody murder. We need your troops in the UK as rapidly as possible because we are shipping troops out to the Mideast and the Far East because the barn's on fire. And what ends up happening then is that we're sending these troop convoys over. They are very heavily escorted because King makes a deliberate decision that, I can accept a slow dribble of drowned merchant mariners, but I absolutely cannot accept a drowned regiment of American boys on board one of these transports. And therefore, those convoys are going to be guarded within an inch of their life. And, in many cases, we're sending our old battleships along with them to make sure that people like Gneisenau and Scharnhorst don't show up. So that's one thing that's going on. The other thing that's happening here is that the British are also creating a number of obligations for us in the form of, we need North Carolina and the Wasp up in Scapa Flow because the Tirpitz is big and scary and our KGV class don't really match up well against her. Can you guys come, mind the shop while we're off doing things like capturing Madagascar in May and, stuff like that. And so I think a lot of that gets lost to observers, that this is a coalition war, that we have partners that are trying to pick up the slack for our other partners. That's how you play a coalition war. And I think it is very ungenerous of a lot of the British observers out there not to give King his due, that he's doing crazy things like running the Wasp into the Mediterranean to, dump off Spitfires in Malta and crap like that. You guys are creating a lot of commitments for our ships, our big ships, all of which require escorts. And if I didn't have those commitments, maybe those destroyers might have been in a better position to actually escort some of our convoys. I will ding King for not implementing convoying on a limited basis for tankers, perhaps a month or so earlier than he did. But part of that is also due to the fact that we really didn't have a good understanding for what Paukenschlag was at the beginning. It could have just been a PR stunt by Donuts. I'm going to send a couple of boats over just to, shoot things up and, raise holy hell. We didn't really understand until almost March that, my God, this is a sustained effort on the part of the Kriegsmarine, and they've really have figured out how to get boats over here to do things on a sustained basis. And so I give King a B plus maybe for his handling of that whole episode. It was ugly, but we accepted the losses and we moved on. And I really think that he did just about as well as he could have done. Seth?
I agree with that 100%. And Bill and I have actually talked about this multiple times. Is that King gets crucified because a bunch of tankers and cargo ships and whatnot get sunk during the happy time, or the second happy time. But regardless of this, he also could only do what he could with what he had too. Excuse me. And he's trying to fight a two-ocean war, which, oh, by the way, our main battle force, with the exception, obviously, the aircraft carriers, has been destroyed in the Pacific. So we don't have a whole hell of a lot to fight with. And as you said, he's got a lot of balls in the air. So he's trying to juggle what he can with what he has, which is not as much as people assume that we had at the time. And the fact that, as you said perfectly well, Washington goes, but freaking Washington, the nautical assassin, goes and runs North Atlantic service along with WASP, along with later on South Dakota and the brand spanking new Alabama before they ever go to, South Dakota goes to the Pacific, comes back, but Alabama goes out to the Atlantic before she ever goes to the Pacific to do this very thing when we needed those ships in the Pacific is all you need to know right there. Because, you're sending capital ships to do work in the Atlantic when they were, frankly, especially for the American war effort, were needed far more in the Pacific at the time.
Yeah. I will absolutely grant that the British, and I talk about this extensively in my 1942 book, so that, thank you for giving me this question, because it was like, I just love to blather about this. The British had already gone through the first happy time, and their exports have been cut down dramatically. The larder was not very full in the UK at this point in time. There are things like fuel stocks and food stocks have been drawn down pretty drastically. So there wasn't a lot of buffer to play here. And, the fact then that the second happy time takes off, and as Roger Wynne, who was the commander of the British submarine tracking room, puts it, the problem is, Admiral, a lot of these ships that are going down aren't yours, they're ours. So from the British perspective, Paukenschlag was an absolute hair on fire emergency, and they were pressing every panic button they could because they could not afford to watch their imports dive again. So I get it, but I just feel that ex post facto, there has not been a very balanced or nuanced treatment of just all of the various commitments that our Navy and their Navy had to meet. It wasn't just submarines going on here. There's a lot of other stuff happening too.
I think something else too that people fail to understand is that, when the United States goes to war, yes, we had been preparing for war for several years. That's the God's honest truth to a degree. But you don't just go back there and flip that light switch and then trained sailors come out and new destroyers roll off the yard and everything's filled with ammunition and now all this fuel's ready to roll. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
Things take time.
Yes. And to that end, one of the things you'll note in the two ocean Navy bill is that a lot of that capital was allocated for the building of large hulls, carriers, battleships, cruisers. King went to the Navy board and said, we need to be laying down destroyer escorts. And he was turned away on that. He did not get his wish in that regard. And some of that makes sense in that if I'm going to plunk down a bunch of money now, I want to put it into hulls that are as long lead term as possible. I can build destroyer escorts a lot more quickly than I can an Essex class carrier. But what that means is that in 1942, it's just we're in scramble mode. And FDR has got this notion that we're going to build a bunch of these little 168-foot long sub chasers, and that's going to be the magic bullet that's going to get rid of all the boogie subs.
Not in North Atlantic, baby.
Not in North Atlantic, it's not. That's just way too small a hull. I mean, a destroyer is actually a kind of a bad platform for anti-submarine warfare because it's a bigger ship. It is optimized for speed rather than sea keeping. It's a fuel hog. Really, the best kind of design really is what the British would call a sloop and we would call a destroyer escort. It's something a touch smaller, about a 300-foot hull, a little bit beamier. That's a better sea boat. It's less heavily armed as well. You don't need 5-inch guns to go after a surface U-boat. You know, a pair of 3 or 5 inchers will do you just fine. Anyway, yeah, we just don't have the right mix of ships in 1942, and it's really not going to be until the end of 1943 that those hulls are going to start coming off. And some of that's honestly FDR's fault, not King's. Anyway,
look at you guys talking about ASW like experts. I am really impressed, guys.
Thank you. Appreciate you,
I got
bro.
nothing to add except I do want to say that the loss of the merchant mariners was horrific.
No, for sure.
And for a long time in this war, maybe throughout the entire war, you would know we lost more merchant mariners than we did Navy sailors.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. If you look at the percentage casualties, the Merchant Marine has one of the highest percentage casualties of any of the American service branches. I mean, you know, when you start getting into the submarine force and 8th Air Force, you know, their casualties are pretty damn serious, higher. But the Merchant Marine were no slouch.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they suffered. So
that's a good shout out. Go ahead, Seth.
I was going to say, before anybody comments on what John started to say when he sent me text about Paukenschlag, everybody do the ETO, do the ETO. So we've talked about it. We're not doing the ETO. We're not doing the Battle of Bulge, although I could talk about the Bulge for days.
But see, Paukenschlag isn't really ETO. It's Eastern Seaboard.
Hold on, man. Hold on. I'm piling on to your
Battle of the Atlantic.
We will eventually do the Battle of the Atlantic. Yeah, we are. But it ain't coming anytime soon. So don't hold your breath on that right now. Anyway, all right, go, Shawn, go.
Well, all right.
Well, John sold me on it. It's John's fault.
Okay. I appreciate the plug. I got to put a plug. Russell Rolfe Bergstrom, my grandfather, was a merchant marine during Torpedo Junction, and Seth, I never told you this story, but he dropped off soldiers at Guadalcanal. So pretty cool. So you got to put a plug. All right, gents. Hello. I know there's been a lot of talk about the issues of the MK1 torpedo, but I still have a question. Was the magnetic trigger ever fixed making the Mark
14?
What did I say?
14.
Sorry,
I said Mark 1.
Mark 14. Yeah.
Mark 1.
We know.
Mark 14.
All right, we're on the same page. Go ahead.
Was the magnetic trigger ever fixed making the torpedo a keel breaker, or was they just using the impact triggers throughout the war? Thanks.
It was the latter. In order to fix it, they really did need a map, know more about the actual variance in the magnetic force of the Earth in various parts of the world, because what was happening is the magnetic field of the Earth was saturating the magnetic influence exploder in some places. And that was just a very nascent science in those days. And so the COs were just instructed to not use the magnetic exploder.
I didn't know that.
There you go.
Always learning.
Always learning.
I assume that the Mark 48 ad cap has got a little bit better ability in that regard.
Yes, and we flew satellites in the early 70s to map the magnetic field of the Earth with great precision, because we needed that for our ICBMs and submarine-launched ballistic missiles, because the magnetic influences, it varies, the gravitational force and all these things, as they vary, they affect the trajectory of long-range missiles. So, yeah, we needed to know it for a whole bunch of reasons.
Got it. Okay, always learning.
My question is about the rapid advance of U.S. forces in the final 18 months of the war. Is the quick advance better understood as a collapse of the Japanese military, or due to the high tempo of U.S. forces that kept the Japanese on their back foot? Thanks for all you guys do, Matt.
Yes.
I knew you were going to say that.
Next question.
No, he's right, though. He's right, because you got 2 feet on the gas. You got 2 feet on the gas.
It's interesting, you know, you look at the end of 1943, and I talk about this in one of the presentations that I do for the World War II museum trips. I mean, if you look at the actual advance in 1943 up the Solomons and up the coast of New Guinea, it's like, 260 miles or something like that up the Solomons, or I don't know, I can't remember the exact number, but there were wags that were pointing out, that at this rate, we're not going to be in Tokyo before 1961. But what's going on sort of behind the scenes in 1943, I think, is there's a shift in what the Russians would call the correlation of forces, and that there's a lot of, just stuff that's kind of out of sight that nobody even really thinks about. But the maturation of American logistics, the creation of the service squadrons that are going to be able to do underway replenishment and that sort of thing, and also the service squadrons that are going to be able to set up bases in places like Majuro and Ulithi and those sorts of things. The maturation of American pilot training programs, the fielding of new second generation fighters in the form of the Hellcat and the Corsair. So it's this sort of multivariate thing that just all comes together in this really nice package for us in the beginning of 1944. Simultaneously, I feel like the Japanese have been just straining just to kind of keep these two campaigns going in New Guinea and in the Solomons. They're at the edge of their resources. And at the beginning of 1944, a lot of the wheels start coming off. And the result is this sort of dramatic transformation in terms of the velocity of American op tempo and how quickly we're able to then penetrate into the Central Pacific. That's my analysis.
You're 100% right, because if you go back to the episodes that we did on Galvanic, on Tarawa, which, Bill, would we do 4, I think? Because we made something like that, and we made a big to-do about it because, yes, it's the kickoff of the Central Pacific Drive, which wins the war. But it's, as you said, it's the maturation of the American military machine. This goes back to what I just said just a few minutes ago. When Pearl Harbor, hits, we don't just flip the switch on and boop, and carriers come out. It doesn't work like that. It took a long time to build those ships. So when you see Operation Galvanic go off in November 1943, and even just a little bit before that, you see the Essex, you see the Bunker Hill, you see Enterprise come back from the yard. You got all these Cleveland class cruisers are popping up like freaking weeds in your yard. You've got Fletcher class DDs. You've got all this stuff coming up. Indiana, Massachusetts, Alabama, South Dakota, both of the North Carolina class,
which were paid for by the Two Ocean Navy bill that was passed in July of 1940.
Correct.
So yeah,
correct. So all these things are now making their way to the Pacific for the very first time, and the slog through the Solomons, and that's exactly what it was, and up through New Guinea, and that's exactly what that was too. It's a slog. But you can only do what you can with what you have.
Right.
And if you look at the Rabaul carrier raid, we talked about, John, I think Bill was recovering from surgery
That's right. It was you and me.
And yeah, it was just the two of us. And Halsey sent 2 carriers down there. He sent Princeton and he sent Sarah down there.
Yeah.
Because that's all he had.
Sarah's day in the sun. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah. That's her one and only time to shine. But that's all he had.
Yeah.
He didn't have any heavy cruisers to send down because they all got shot up or sunk at Guadalcanal. And the ones that were still around were, oh, by the way, up in north with Nimitz. So, I mean, there's things. In 1944, we had enough things to do multiple things at one time.
Yep.
In late 1943, we simply didn't. We just didn't. And everything that was being built, everything that was new was going up north to Nimitz, that was going in the Central Pacific Drive, which kicks off at Galvanic and Tarawa. So,
good stuff. All right. This one is from Nicholas D. I do not know. I've never heard this. So you guys, I'm going to put you guys to the test. Yeah. Were there ever any conversations or diary entries from higher ranking generals or politicians during the long, dark spring of 42 where the U.S. would have been forced or thought about negotiations with the Japanese? Thanks for the podcast. Look forward to it every week.
Not to my, I'll throw it to my friends here, but not to my knowledge. Bill and John, the only time surrender is ever talked about, and it's not even surrender, is on Guadalcanal when they tell Vandergrift, hey, you might have to go up into the hills, and fight when the things are really hitting the fan. But that's the only time. And even then, it was very, very brief. And Vandergrift is like, that ain't happening.
And that wasn't surrender as much as it was guerrilla warfare.
Correct.
Right.
Cool.
No, I haven't seen anything like that in all of the 1942 work that I have done. Although
yeah, you would know. Yeah.
I will say that there were a lot of people during that year who were, no one had a clue what the outcome of the war was going to be.
Sure.
That there were a lot of people saying, Eisenhower has this beautiful quote that no one in their hearts and minds can recall the fears and worries of those days. It was a really black time, and so I think that there were a lot of people that were kind of slogging along, like, I don't know how this thing is going to turn out. It's a dumpster fire right now. There was never any talk of surrender that I have seen, but there were certainly a lot of people that were extremely concerned about what the trajectory of the war looked like at the beginning of 42. It was bad.
That's an episode in and of itself right there. Because, I mean, you could talk about that. You say, I'd say from January till, well, the whole year, really, frankly, until November of
It's till
42.
November.
It's a coin flip. It
Yeah.
really is. It's a coin flip. And nobody knew. I mean, I think, yeah, obviously we know, but I mean, nobody knew. Vandergrift didn't know. He knew he could hold out, but for how long? Is he going to be up in the hills?
Yeah.
Is the Enterprise going to get hit by a submarine leaving to go get patched up after Santa Cruz? Nobody knows. Are we going to be without a carrier? There's so much doubt that goes into 42, and then after Guadalcanal, frankly, after the naval battle of Guadalcanal, the November 15th battle, things start to kind of people start to go, maybe.
Well, and the same is true on other fronts as well. I mean, you can definitely find quotes from the Soviets that, we are extremely concerned about what is going on in Stalingrad at this point in time. We look back at Stalingrad now and it's like, well, they hit 6th and 4th Panzer armies with these huge haymakers, which seems obvious in hindsight that, of course, they're going to win at Operation Uranus. And brother, it ain't so. I mean, every time the Russians had tried some sort of a mechanized offensive, places like Kharkov had just been disastrous failures, that had put 400,000 guys in the POW camps. I mean, there's no assurance on the part of the Soviets that the military reforms that they had put in place, really starting since July of 1941, were in fact going to coalesce into a package of capabilities that would allow them to go toe-to-toe with the Wehrmacht. And I would argue that it's really not until Christmas Eve, 1942, is when 2nd Guards Army drops the hammer on Manstein's Operation Wintergewitter and just, puts paid to this whole notion of doing a rescue mission up to Paulus and 6th Army in Stalingrad. It's really not until then that you can definitively say that Operation Uranus has in fact succeeded, and now the Soviets have demonstrated the Red Army has the moxie to go toe-to-toe offensively with the Wehrmacht. This, as Seth says, this really doesn't coalesce until the very end of 1942.
We got John going there, man.
Yeah.
John started going on the global scale.
You're my sweet spot. So, yep.
All right, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, John, so forgive me. Is there any update on whether the IJN destroyer hunting the USS Nautilus was indeed the IJN, or is it
Arashi?
John had mentioned at least once that we were told we got that wrong, as that was a squadron leader and less likely to hunt subs. Regards, Matt.
Thank you, Matt. No, I've got nothing new for you. This is kind of scuttlebutt that came to me from Tony Tully, because Tony, of course, is still deep in the weeds on all this stuff. But you've heard basically what we got at this point, that there's a suspicion that since Arashi is a squadron commander, that she would not have been tasked with keeping Nautilus's head down. It would have been another ship in that Desron, but I don't know which one.
Okay,
I'll ask Tony though. That's a good thing.
Yeah, write that down, John.
All right, man.
Here's a hypothetical, guys. Let's mix it up a little bit. We know that the Japanese utilized the sword on a wide scale, whether versus military or civilian. But Jay's question from Cincinnati is, of course, just out there, which weapon do you feel killed more people as a whole in World War II? The samurai sword or the atomic bomb?
The atomic bomb, easy.
You think so? I would go for this. I actually, my rifles, man, or artillery.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Artillery, for sure.
Artillery.
Mm-hmm. Bill, what were the numbers that we spit out for the atomic bomb episode? Do you remember that?
It's less than 200,000, right?
I was going to say it's less than 200,000.
145,000, I want to say 150.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, the cancers are. It's impossible to determine causality when it comes to those late cancers, but though I think the worst estimates are just under 200,000. The lowest estimates are something like, let's see, 60,000 for Hiroshima. John, you can correct me, and something like 80 or 90 for. Go ahead.
No, it's actually flipped. Hiroshima's around 100,000. Nagasaki is less than that, 35, 40.
So you think the cold steel killed more people than the atom bombs?
Okay, so here's the only thing that I would say: you've got a war going on in China that ends up killing.
That's why I think the rape of Nanking and all those battles there are massive amount of Chinese.
And the fact that at the end of that war, there was a prisoner of war exchange. And this is a conflict that has involved millions of soldiers. And the number of POWs that were exchanged by the Chinese and the Japanese mutually was measured in the hundreds, at least according to Rich Frank. And that hundreds of thousands of combatants were taken prisoners by both sides. And guess what? They killed them all. And a lot of those, I would argue, probably were beheaded, at least on the part of the Japanese. So I think you can make a credible argument that I'm just doing.
I mean, I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm not saying it's not possible. Yeah, for sure. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying, I mean, you hate to speculate on something like this, especially something as gruesome as this. But I mean, again, if you're going to be killing a bunch of prisoners, you're not going to be chopping too many heads. I'm not saying they didn't, because we all know they did.
You're going to shoot them.
You're going to shoot them. So, and I mean, you talk about like the rape of Manila and all that stuff, which was a horror show. And obviously, there were a couple of, I remember James Scott talking about, there were a couple of houses, one specific, and they called it,
I know this house. I know exactly what you're talking about.
I don't remember the name of the street, but they called it the whatever street Death House.
Yeah.
And there was some jackass on the second floor just lopping heads off all day long, like a damn human guillotine, just pop.
Yes.
So I mean, and they were talking, and I remember one of the survivors said something like there were like a couple hundred bodies down there.
Yes, they were dropping through a hole in the floor. I remember this.
Yeah. So I mean, who knows? I don't know. It's hard to speculate.
So guys, I'm going to be the poetic tool here and quote Robert Frost. Some say the world will end in fire. Some say in ice. What I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. What does it matter?
Thank you.
Or atomic bomb.
I do want to bring it back around and just say artillery is the big killer.
The
king of battle. The king of battle.
The king of battle.
King of the battlefield.
Yep.
All right, Commodore. Why is it that some submarines, such as the Wahoo, had success early in the Pacific War despite the high failure rate of the infamous Mark 14 torpedo? Were there factors as tactics that mitigated the torpedo problem for these subs? Also, do we have a reliable estimate of the failure rates on the torpedo? Thank you for the time in creating this outstanding podcast. Shodan.
Yeah, so honestly, so we kind of alluded to this, maybe we even said it in plain English, that the glancing blows were more effective as far as the exploder goes than the well set up shots, right? So if you try to shoot, you're aiming at the intercept point and you shoot so that you're going to hit a 90-degree angle. Those exploders, firing pins would shear and the torpedo wouldn't explode. But if you're in a bit of a stern chase and the torpedo impacts at more of an acute angle, the firing pins didn't shear off and you would get a better detonation more often. So the failure rate was something like 80% because a lot of these guys were setting up their shots per doctrine. The guys who didn't set up their shots per doctrine were generally the more aggressive guys. They say, screw it, I'm shooting anyway. And that is exactly the attitude exhibited by one Dudley Morton. And so, yes, some of these guys had incredible success rates, but it was in spite of the fact they weren't setting up their shots right, rather than, so
That was
it's
kind of yes, actually, yeah,
almost accidental. And so the more aggressive guys then could succeed, but they weren't sure why they were succeeding. They just knew that the torpedoes were blowing up. Yeah, Seth, you got something?
I do, and I think it's also, and I mean, it sounds very elementary, but I think it's true. It's the luck of the draw in terms of the batch of fish you get, because there's the episode when Morton goes into the Sea of Japan for the first time,
right?
And he sinks. I think he sinks one ship.
Yeah,
because his torpedoes suck. And I mean, this is Mush Morton. So, I mean, the dude ain't firing from, 10 miles away. He's going up there kissing these guys before he kills them or tries to. And he's got crappy torpedoes and he's just got a bad batch. And that's when he comes back to Pearl and he's like, grumpy, he explodes in Uncle Charlie's office. And literally he like starts cussing and, going bananas to the point where Charlie Lockwood's like, you might need to go home. you might need to go home.
It might be,
of course, and then of course, he acquiesces and lets Mush go out one more time. And of course,
one more time,
what happens? But it's that batch of fish that he had, Bill. You may remember, but I think he only sinks one ship.
Yeah, it was one ship, and again,
I think he damages one.
In the Sea of Japan, again. Yeah, here we go. In the Sea of Japan, where the Japanese weren't expecting you, you could set up the shot better. And that's what set him up, is you had more time, you could be more delicate, you could be more, intentional. And those were the torpedoes that failed. So I'm going with it.
Okay.
Cool. Good answer.
Boss.
Good answer. All right. Greg's got a question. He had heard on another YouTube channel, quote,
Don't watch any other YouTube channels. What's wrong with you?
No, Steph. No. Always learning.
Always learning. So Greg wants to, he's asking a legitimate question. He's taking it to he's seen some JV crap on YouTube and he's bringing it to the experts, Seth. Okay.
There you go. All right. I like that better.
On a YouTube channel called What is Going On with Shipping, Battle of Leyte, Gulf Logistics and What Ifs, 80th Anniversary of Largest Naval Battle in History.
That's a great channel, by the way. That's Sal Mercagliano's channel, and it's a great channel. Anyway, go on.
Okay, so maybe cool. It's not JV, but anyway.
No, Sal's good.
That Taffy 3 was 50 miles west of where the task force should have been located on October 25th. Is there any truth to this? I haven't been able to find anything either way, and if I think it's true, or I think it opens a lot of questions. Thanks, Greg.
I mean, without pulling up the map, I have no idea.
No clue.
I don't know.
No
Sorry.
clue.
Bill, do you have any?
No.
And this is where I'll put in my plug again. Sal really knows his stuff. That channel is great. And he's done a number of fascinating presentations just on the first fast oilers in the Pacific. I mean, that dude knows his stuff. So I'm inclined to say that if you saw it there, it's credible.
Yeah. I have heard, without confirming, I have heard that is indeed the case, that Taffy 3 was relatively out of position. How far? I don't have a freaking clue. I don't have any idea.
Okay. Next one, my boy G-Mac from Australia. He had a series of questions last time we did this. How do they make the naval guns fire accurately when the ship is constantly rolling? When a ship is static, they roll even more. Were they just sitting in the water static when giving coastal to support? Artillery mortars use stakes, etc. How does naval gun get registered? I believe initially planes were launched to help walk fire on enemy vessels?
It's
Did they have
happen
a
all
role
the time.
So go ahead and give us science.
The bottom line is that these analog fire control systems were incredibly sophisticated, and they were always slaved up to a gyroscope that was in the ship that was keeping constant track of how am I heeling and yawing and doing all that stuff. What is the ship's motion? And they are factoring that into the solution that's being generated for the turrets. And so the elevation of the gun barrels and all that stuff, in many cases, what would happen would be that the fire control system itself would interrupt the firing of the weapons. So the weapons officer would pull the trigger and say, okay, I wanted to fire the guns, but the system would wait until the ship rolls to the proper angle, and then it would know that, okay, now my barrels are lined up with where my solution says they should be. Now I fire my guns and things like that. So the bottom line is that we had thought all of that stuff through and were reasonably able to compensate for the motion of the ship. The other thing, some of these systems were sophisticated enough that they were taking into account things like humidity, the temperature, even the Coriolis effect. Because when you fire these guns, the Earth continues spinning underneath you as that is happening. These systems would compensate for the Coriolis effect. So we're talking real four-dimensional chess kind of systems here.
So just think about this. Everything you just said, but like times 10, like really in-depth stuff. That's what Willis Lee and Harvey Walsh and Jonas Platt
all
and
those dudes.
Glenn Davis and all those guys, they're sitting around smoking cigarettes in Willis Lee's sea cabin on Washington and the gun club, and they're having these conversations. That's what keeps them up at night.
Yep. Yeah, all of this stuff.
A bunch of badasses.
What's the effect of my barrel liner wear? That the liner on these guns is only good for 100 plus rounds or something like that. If I'm on round 75, what does that do?
What does that affect? How does that affect the trajectory of this round?
These guys are so deep in the weeds. Anyway,
go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, some of these rifles, they were stabilized as well with what we would call today accelerometers. So yeah, I mean, people think that the computer didn't come into existence until the 1960s.
Not true.
With the IBM mainframes and things. Not true. Analog computers were still computers, folks, and they were very sophisticated. The ones we used for the torpedo data computer in a submarine, all these things, right? Those were computers. They used servos
cogs
and
wheels
and
cogs
gears.
You cranked them instead of to put inputs and things like that. And so, yeah, I mean, they were kind of Stone Age computers, but they could be very precise. Yeah.
And I mean, again, throwing it back to Willis Lee, and we're all a fan of Willis Lee. But I mean, just imagine those conversations for a mathematical fool like me. That makes me sweat.
Your head explode. Yeah,
dude, seriously. And these guys, I forgot when Edwin Hooper, who was like the man, they're all getting in there, and the MIT freaking grad, for crying out loud, and they're talking about this, like we're sitting here talking about this,
right? They were doing calculus in the field on some of these solutions, right? Now, you didn't have to do calculus to fire the gun. What we were doing is they were taking. It's called numerical analysis, right? They were doing the calculations and then sending it off to have engineers build machines that mimic the calculations.
Right.
And then they would have, we'll call them Jesus factors, because that's probably exactly what they called them. They would tweak the calculations as they detected error, and then change the machine a little bit to match so that
or change their doctrine a little bit too. Mentally they'd be like, okay, the machine can't compensate for this, but I know that I'm going to notch it down, 0.5 degree, and that's, or whatever,
Exactly.
To that end, and I don't know the exact date, but it's like a few days before the battleship fight off Guadalcanal. And I say maybe a week, maybe 10 days. And John, you may remember this, and Bill, you too, that Lloyd Mustin, of course, is assistant gunnery officer on USS Atlanta.
Yeah.
Lieutenant
And
Commander.
USS, and he's acting as, or not he, she
He's
is
assistant
acting
gunnery
as the
officer.
target for
Yeah.
USS Washington as 56 is calibrating her main battery. And of course, this is all
Absolutely.
Willis Lee saying, I want these things to be able to split somebody's hair from
Right.
10 miles away.
Right.
And then, you know, Edwin Hooper and Platt and all these guys, well, Platt's 5 inches, but still they're all doing their thing. And Mustin is watching these rounds drop in Atlanta's wake, just boom, 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 boom. And he makes a comment. He says something like, you know, if anybody messes with this battleship, they're going to be in for a bad day or something along those lines. And of course, they do.
Yeah, exactly.
And they are.
So
anyway,
cool.
all right, we've
So
beaten
cool.
that to
No, we haven't. We
that
can
was
keep
some
going
geeking
on
out,
that.
guys.
Well,
that was some geeking out.
I got a good follow-up question for Patrick. In regards to this, we're going to take another step. He says, thanks for the great work. My question is simply this. Who thought to tie radar to fire control systems for naval guns? As you stated, Admiral Willis Lee was an earlier adopter, but did he come up with it or did somebody else? Thanks for the great podcast.
So there's a whole team of guys that do this, but it's actually none other than Swede Momsen, who's the main driver of, who's a main driver of a lot of this stuff in 1940. He's not the only one, obviously, but he's the main pusher, if you will, of radar directed naval gunfire. He's the guy that's pushing a lot of this stuff and is getting a lot of this stuff done. Yes, Lee was one of the early adopters for sure. But it was Swede Momsen was the main arbitrator in 1940 and 41.
Cool.
Yeah.
Seth, I will not miss the opportunity to point out that a submariner came up with the idea for the Doolittle raid, putting Army airplanes on Navy aircraft carriers, and a submariner came up with the idea of tying radar to gunnery on surface ships. We're seeing a commonality here, guys. What would that be?
I think it's dolphins, Bill. I think it's dolphins. Swede
There you go.
Momsen is just. Somebody asked when we were in San Diego, guys. Somebody asked if there
He
was a
solved the
biography.
torpedo problem too. Remember,
Yes,
he
he
solved the
did.
torpedo problem. Let's be
Yes, he did.
complete here.
And he developed the VT fuse, or he partially developed it. If there was a biography that is yet to be written,
Swede
there you
Momsen.
go. Swede Momsen.
There you go.
Yeah.
Get after it.
Good point.
All right, let's keep it simple. Brian B wants to know, did the Kamikaze dive bombers or medium bombers, did they carry rear gunners or full crews when they went on their missions?
That's a great question.
Yeah. Well, the last episode we recorded just this past Tuesday, the poetic tool goes to meet his ends with a full crew.
Right, he did.
Great point.
Why should I die
Seth.
alone when I could bring 2 other guys with me to die?
Right. No, I think that points to the fact that, I think they probably crewed these planes up fully. I mean, the majority of kamikazes were single seat. You know, the Zero, honestly, is the most. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so
the evidence would tend to suggest that, if you're flying a Val out there, you're going to put 2 guys in it.
Because I mean, like you're off Okinawa, Laffey and Hugh Hadley and Evans. We did episodes
Some
on
of those were
guys.
like trainers and that kind of stuff.
Some of them were, but a lot of the ones that like P-laid, Hugh Hadley and Laffey were Judy's.
Judy's.
Judy's,
right, not Jill's.
Yeah.
That's the
mind. And there were Val's out the wazoo. You know, a lot of Val's. Yeah. But anyway, that's there.
Moving on, I got a special shout out for the Commodore. This is from Cecil. He says he's an USS Indianapolis family member, my father's cousin, and the man who I am named after is radio man Arthur Cecil Trotter, who was lost in the sinking. Special thanks to Captain Toady and all he has done. So the shout out to the Commodore, and his question is, in the recent kamikaze-related episodes, several Imperial Japanese admirals have been mentioned in relation to Japan's decision process to proceed with organized suicide attacks. What was the Imperial Japanese involvement in this? Were they in the decision process, the planning, execution, if any? Regards again, Cecil.
Go ahead, John.
Onishi, Admiral Onishi Takajiro is, I think,
father
sort
of the kamikaze.
Yeah, father of the kamikaze. He's the dude that, is in command of, is it First Air Fleet that's in the Philippines? I'm
no.
he's the overall commander of the Philippine.
Real-time history. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, no, it's all good. And he's the guy that ends up sauntering into the headquarters of this one air unit, and ends up, picking these guys, Lieutenant Secchi and so forth, to go out and do that first mission. And so it seems from the scholarship that there had sort of been this.
It is First Air Fleet.
First Air Fleet, thank you. That there's kind of an organic upwelling, a number of different people within the Imperial Navy and also the Army too, are like, our goose is cooked after the Battle of Phil C. How are we going to make lemonade out of lemons? And are moving towards this notion of sure hit, sure death tactics. But I think you can say that Onishi is really sort of the guy that has high enough level rank to kind of promulgate that as an official sort of policy. And it's clear as soon as Secchi does his thing and, wipes out San Lo, that Onishi immediately doubles down on that and says, this stuff works, we're going with it.
Hey, but let's be complete here. These conversations about special attack tactics.
Special attack.
Yeah, they were held in front of the Emperor. So it's, he absolutely gave credence to him and de facto approval of these tactics, these methods, right? So this wasn't made by some low-level dude. The Emperor, in fact, towards the end, one of the episodes that will have aired by the time this one does, we will have talked about the fact that people were discussing in front of the Emperor that we don't even think special tactics will work to defeat the invasion, right? The Emperor himself, right?
Says, I no longer have faith in special attack tactics. That really is, that's the straw that breaks the camel's back in terms of the discussions on the evening of the 10th of August. So, but the Emperor is perfectly aware of this stuff.
All right, moving on. This is for John. John, in Shattered Sword, maybe you've heard of it, you characterize the Japanese Navy as, quote, over-officered, yet the great majority of its pilots were petty and warrant officers. Can you explain all this? Morgan from Pacific Grove, California wants to know.
That's a great question. If you look at the evolution of the Japanese air service, the Navy's air service, I guess I should say, they become aware that they're not going to have, that their Navy just isn't big enough to put officers in the cockpits of all of their aircraft, particularly when you start looking at things like their land-based bombers, like the G3M Nell, and then later on the Betty. I mean, these are 7-person machines. Is it going to have to be an officer at the controls of every one of those things? It doesn't scale. And so they started relatively early a whole sort of separate branch of flight training that was oriented towards kids, really, who demonstrated some aptitude for this sort of thing. And so they would get these boys into the service, in some cases age 16, 17, and start bringing them up through the ranks. And it turns out that a lot of these non-commissioned officers, petty officers and whatnot, were some of their best triggermen. There's an episode, I can't remember exactly where in the Battle of Midway that I talk about it. It's like it's the 0700 attack where the B-26s and VT-8 detached come in. So that's 10 American aircraft come in, and they just get absolutely shellacked by the Japanese cap. 5 of the 6 TBFs go down, 2 of the 4 B-26s go down. All of those dudes behind the stick on the Combat Air Patrol, by and large, they were all petty officers, and they were very experienced and fought in China. And so, the bottom line is that unlike the Americans, who tended to put officers in pilot positions only, there was definitely an initiative on the part of the Japanese to be able to have petty officers as well. There you go.
Good explanation, John. Concerning the Battle of Surgar Strait, why did the destroyer torpedo attacks have such a great success than the multiple PT attacks earlier? Was there difference in the torpedo used, such as range or speed? I enjoyed the episodes for the information and the relaxed relationship you guys have. Look forward to new ones all the time, Stephen A.
Bill, you want to start?
I'm not relaxed.
You are.
Drink
There you
water.
You're not as relaxed as we are, but yes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'll punt.
So the PT boats, first of all, a lot early post-war histories of the Battle of Surigao Strait give a lot of credit to the PT boats for doing a lot of things, and really they as we know now, they did not. And the reason for that mainly is the fact that there's a small craft. It's an unstable platform, number one. Number two, they got to get, like, as I said, I got to kiss you before I kill you kind of thing. And they got to get super, super close. And when they're attacking too, they're being shot at their plywood crap. Well, they're marine grade plywood, whatever the hell, mahogany, whatever the hell it is, wooden boats that are being shot at by, destroyers and cruisers and battleships, and things kind of go haywire. So you got to point your boat to where you want your torpedo to hit, as
And
opposed
it's
to
a smaller torpedo.
Yes, it is.
It's a
Yes, it is.
17.7 inch. They're basically using the airdropped torpedo
Yes, they are.
as
Yes, they are.
opposed to the Mark 15, which is the standard, or is it the 13? I'm spacing.
I think it's the 15.
15.
15. Thank you. Which
Surface
is,
ship.
yeah, surface ship, much longer range fish.
But again, with a PT, you have to point the vessel at the target, which sounds like that's going to make it more accurate because I'm driving here. That means I'm going to hit here. No, it ain't, dude. Because with a DD, you can be going this way and you can still be shooting this way. And that's what happens. And the destroyers, first of all, they have a hell of a lot more fish than the PTs do have.
Correct. Better fire control too.
Absolutely. And it's a better torpedo.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
So the DDs are going to hit, and they're going to hit, well, not going to hit every time, but they're going to hit a lot more accurately than the PTs. And the PT sailors, God bless them to hell. I mean, they were incredibly brave to ride on those damn things.
They were.
But, and there were only very few certain circumstances where the PT boats were actually very effective in anything in terms of ship killing.
That's right.
In the Pacific.
And the only thing I would add, Seth, is that, again, the torpedo only works if the target doesn't zig, because it doesn't maneuver. And so, and you can see, and like a submarine, you can see this thing coming.
Yeah.
So they're small. So
Mosquitoes.
We attack at night. So you're hoping they don't see you. But if they do see you and they maneuver, you've missed. And you've got to be really close, which means counterfire is going to be really accurate. So it was very, very risky.
And then two, a PT does not and cannot fire a spread of torpedoes, whereas a destroyer can. And that is a huge difference, Bill. You know this far better than I. You fire 1, 2, 3, 4, as opposed to 6. You're going to get more hits, or however many. Yeah, whatever. You're going to get more hits.
All right, so here we go. Captain Toady and Seth and friends. A friend introduced me to your podcast. I'm so glad he did. I absolutely love it. Probably too much, as listening to it has probably decreased my work proficiency over the last couple of weeks. I just tore through season 1. I have a quick question in regards to episode 112 about the lead up to Operation Watchtower. In that episode, you discussed the command structure for the operation and that Admiral McCain was in charge of land-based naval air assets supporting the invasion prior to Henderson Field becoming operational. Where did those aircraft come from? From what I can tell, the U.S. didn't have any operational airfields anywhere near Guadalcanal in August of 42. I look forward to your response. This is from John H. He's a Naval Academy grad, 93, and he says something afterwards about Navy and Army and all that stuff, but I'm not going to repeat that on the
And by the way, Bill, I like your shirt. I have that shirt. I think I bought that shirt when you bought that shirt.
You did indeed. We were there together.
I did. So, all right. So most, not all, but most of the land-based air support for Guadalcanal at that time, in the very early stages of the campaign, is coming out of Espirito Santo, and they're mostly B-17s and PBYs and hell's fire. What else? There's a layover, John and Bill, when they're
New
coming
Caledonia?
out. Yes, thank you.
New Caledonia.
Wait, are they? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, because they're coming out and there's a layover before, like the fighters, when John L. Smith and his people get up, and not John L.
And
Smith.
San Cristobal? No, we didn't have anything.
But they're delivering some of those fighters. Aren't they using the Long Island to bring some of those assets
They're
in?
bringing the Marine Corps fighters in there. Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Long Island is cat launching Mangram's people and his SPDs, and they're launching John L. Smith's people and their FRS. But there's another echelon coming from Espirito Santo, and I cannot remember for the life of me who the heck they are. Anyway, but they're coming from Espirito Santo in New Caledonia, I guess.
Yeah. And then once they get established on Henderson Field, it's not McCain anymore.
Correct.
There you go.
Geiger.
All right. Dave F.
Yeah, by the way, before we get off that, we want to know in precise detail. I want you a metric, how much your proficiency has dropped, okay, by watching us. We need that data for our marketing.
Hard data.
Plan. Yeah, exactly. Hard data. Not hand waving. My productivity has dropped. No, we want percentages. Are you 30% less proficient or 20%? We need that. Thank you.
Moving on. Dave L. says, "Dear Seth and Bill and John," no mention of Shawn in that, but who's keeping track?
Yeah.
"My favorite ship from the Pacific War is the USS Enterprise CV6. Wow, how about that?
Man.
My question is about her time testing the F4U Corsair in early 43. Specifically, how long was the testing period and the thoughts on the ensign eliminator by pilots like Swede Vedison and the Big E's deck crew?"
Okay, so how long was it? I don't know. I don't know.
All right, moving on to the next.
But so Vedeza, I knew Swede very, 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 very well, and of course he was the first naval aviator to land an F4U on the deck of CV6, and there's video footage of that. He just plops it right down. So that whole theory of the British had to teach us how to land a carrier on F4U on a carrier, it's a bunch of malarkey. Nobody taught Swede Vedeza how to land an F4U on the Enterprise. He just plopped it down because he was a badass. And that's generally it's true. I mean, he was the hottest stick in the Navy at the time, and he was, and everybody knew it. But how long did it go? I don't know. But I remember the man telling me to my face, he said that as soon as he got in that cockpit and launched from the Enterprise, he's like, "This is the baddest fighter in the air.
Yeah.
And we need these, and we need these now."
It was an amazing plane.
Oh, yeah. No, Corsair was incredibly awesome. But he was an early advocate of getting the F4U to the fleet as fast as they possibly could. He was also a guy, and not to get too sidetracked because I know we're running slow, who advocated that the SBD, if given more guns and taken a little weight out, could have been a good fighter because he shot down theoretically 3 aircraft with a Dauntless. So
good on him.
Would you guys consider that the best fighter of the Pacific?
Oh yeah,
Corsair.
Yes. Corsair, you bet.
By far,
certainly the sexiest fighter of the Pacific.
Yeah, I mean, how do you want to measure it? I mean, in terms of raw airframe performance characteristics, yeah, it's better than the Hellcat. I mean, you have to say, but the Hellcat is a better fighter from a mass production standpoint. If you've got a whole bunch of ensigns that you want to bring home, I mean,
yes,
that the Corsair is a hotter machine and it's a little more finicky too. So
I think the proof is in the pudding in that is that the Hellcat, granted, it was replaced by the Bearcat, but the Corsair keeps rolling all the way through Korea.
Right.
So
yeah.
Okay.
There you
Another follow on here. Just go with me. How would you compare it to the Mustang?
What, the Corsair?
Oh God, we've gone into this.
Lord.
I look at the Mustang is just like this. I look at that as like the frat boy fighter. Everybody loves the Mustang. It's got a super long range, and I just man, for my money, I love the Corsair. It's just damn good, and it's got better firepower. I would argue. Of course, my favorite.
They got 650s. They both got 650s.
No, but a lot of the Mustangs get down to 4.
No, No, the other way around. Yeah, the early Mustangs got 4. The Bs,
Oh, and they went up to okay.
The B
my
models
bad.
got 4, and the Ds have 650s. So,
What
but
you're
regardless
seeing
of
here
that,
is my underlying inclination. I love the P-47, and I love planes like the Hawker Typhoon. I just love big, brutal, 850s kind of fighters. That's my mojo. So
Okay.
the
Now,
47 was the Warthog of the day.
I
Man.
just love that.
So I've got another one, and this one's for John.
I gotta chime in here. All I can say is I've driven the Mustang. I've never driven the Corsair. So you guys
flown a Mustang?
No.
He's lying. He's driven.
I'm talking about a Ford Mustang.
That's what he's saying.
I'm a General
that what you
Motors
guys are
guy.
talking
I don't
about?
want to hear it.
That's not what you're talking about. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
And by the way, I've flown in a Mustang. I'm just saying, and it's cool. So
I'm not saying it's a bad plane. I'm just like, I don't know.
Okay.
hey, man,
Yeah, go,
I'll
Shawn.
go
I've got a
Corsair all the
question
way.
for John. Now, Seth already knows the answer to this question, and I'm just going to tell you, John, before I ask. Seth got this question wrong. Okay.
What was the question?
Well, would you bear with me here? Okay. John, what World War II plane shot down the most enemy planes?
I'm going MU-109.
Negative.
That was my
B-17.
answer too, by the way. I'm just saying.
Okay.
That was my answer too.
B-17.
That was Seth's answer, and it's the wrong answer.
What is the right answer?
The right answer is the Focke-Wulf.
The 190.
The 190.
Yeah, you were in the right area. All right, here we go. Sean Q says,
I push back on that. I mean, if you think about destroyed enemy aircraft, though, you think about the butchery that happened on the Eastern Front at the beginning of Barbarossa. A lot of those Russian planes were destroyed on the runway and that sort of thing, and the majority of that was taking place as a result of the 109. Anyway,
95% of it was taken. That was my guess too. Was 109. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Okay. So
beautiful. John, it's okay. We still love you. We still love you, John.
This is why my dog's named after Gunther Roll. 109 ace. But go ahead.
All right. Sean Q asks, with the exception of kamikazes, did the Japanese come up with any strategical innovation during the war that caused us serious difficulties, or were most of the difficulties in the end really our own fault in not being prepared in time for the Pacific War to kick off? Thanks, guys. Keep up the good work. Tuesdays are my favorite for us. Okay, me and the cat. Go ahead.
Long Lance torpedo, man.
Yep.
That obviously caused us significant difficulties in the night fighting in around Guadalcanal and up through the Solomons. This is a weapon system that was not understood by the Americans. Although, I just made a new friend, a guy named Justin Pike, who is very, very knowledgeable about Japanese ground-based aviation. He's a freak about the Nell and the Betty and that sort of thing. He just forwarded me a number of pre-war intel estimates that came from our naval attaches in Japan that show that we were aware of the Type 93 torpedo, and at least insofar as being aware that Japanese destroyers were carrying 24-inch rather than 21-inch torpedoes. So,
but did we know the characteristics? Obviously not.
That was the thing. And it's funny because one of these reports that Justin forwarded me, we had a naval attaché that went to the torpedo school near Yokosuka, and like 1935 or 36, and he's asking all sorts of questions. Hey, have you guys experimented at all with larger torpedoes? And the Japanese just lie outright to him. But we were aware of in the report, it's called trackless torpedoes, which is an indication of pure oxygen driven torps. No, we didn't have a clue about their performance characteristics. Yeah, and that just bites us in the butt in the Solomons.
So what about the bonsai charge? That kind of took us by surprise too. And I don't think it was a matter of lack of preparation. I think it was just a matter of what we call failure of imagination.
I don't know if it took us by surprise because you got to remember there are instances of bonsai charges, quote
Mhm.
air quotes, bonsai charges that occur in the Philippines in 1941, 42.
Mhm.
So it wasn't necessarily an unknown tactic. I think any surprises like, the Marines, especially at Tennessee River, Alligator Creek, whatever you want to call it, are sitting there going, "You're really doing this?
Right.
Mhm.
And are you serious?
Yeah.
Mhm.
You're coming at 37s firing canister and 1917s, oh, and 50 cals too, and you're coming, really?
Whatever, bro.
Fine. Whatever you want
Bring
to
it
do,
on.
keep it coming. Keep feeding me belts because we're going to knock this down right now." I
Yeah.
think it was more of a surprise tactic in that I can't believe you're actually doing this. Not
Right.
that it was an unknown thing because, excuse me, again, it had happened, dang it, numerous times in the Philippines in 41, especially late 41, early 42, when they were pushing our people back to Bataan, and it was, it was a
I,
thing.
I would say just in general, the high quality of Japan's infantry was a bit of a surprise, certainly to the early war combatants. The British just couldn't deal with these people at
Yeah.
all. You look at
Right.
Yamashita's
Yes.
offensive in Malaya, 25th Army just crushes the British over and over and over again because they
In
just don't.
Burma. And
And
Burma.
yes,
Burma.
Aida's army is the same thing.
I think it's their
You
longevity. Like these people can subsist on virtually nothing and get so
nothing.
damn far.
They've made a virtue out of necessity in that they have terrible logistics, and as a result, they travel very, very light, and they are really, really good at
Yeah.
fixing attacks from the front while working around your flanks to launch attacks from the rear or drop roadblocks behind you that will discomfit you. That just bedeviled the British over and over again in Malaya and Burma. Shawn, to your point, go, Shawn.
Well, I was
Let me
gonna
add,
I was gonna expand on that, just that
What?
point.
Hold,
go
hold
ahead.
on.
With
Bill was
Burma.
gonna.
During the interwar, well, not interwar, but in the 40s and 39, 40, the Japanese developed the jungle school out in Taiwan. And they began understanding how tying yourself mechanized wise to in the jungles was not the way to go. They started utilizing mules to be able to infiltrate and get behind lines because at that time roads were everything. So the Japanese innovation in jungle fights, to drive your point home, John, is how they're able to go all the way through to Singapore and then get into Burma, and they're outflanking the British. And they're like, well, how are they getting behind us? Because they're using mules and wrapping around them. So their jungle warfare was,
Yeah,
I think.
Although I
Mhm.
want to push back on that, because if you look at the Japanese field manuals of the time, they have very little in the way of official jungle doctrine. I grant you that they have that school on Taiwan, but there's the majority of the doctrine that the Japanese army has at the time is developed from Manchuria. They're all about how do we fight the Soviet army. And I would argue too that actually in that early campaign in Malaya in particular, the Japanese are not going to go on to be shining practitioners of armored warfare, but they use their tanks very, very well in Malaya, Slim River in particular.
Roger. Yeah.
So they're good at that too. I think that they really had a package that just, if you look at just the force composition, we're really tanking here. I'm sorry, I'm just fascinated by the Malaya campaign.
Yeah, I love it.
But what? Go ahead, John. Finish.
I was going to say that the Japanese had really good intelligence on what they were going to be up against in Malaya, and so they had just configured 25th Army perfectly in that they had, for the Japanese, had highly mechanized it. They had tons of trucks. They had beefed up its engineering complements so that they were really good at bridge building. They'd pumped in the 4th and 7th tank regiments so that they had armor when they needed that, and the result is that 25th Army was the most highly mechanized force, I would argue, in Japanese army history. And it's precisely so that they can fight this 600-mile campaign from the Kra Isthmus all the way down to Singapore. And they've got all the things in the toolkit. They can do the jungle warfare thing, but also if they need to change it up, tanks right in your face.
The thing I just was thinking of as you guys were talking was it's not necessarily a strategic tactic, but had strategic implications. Was their their tendency, their willingness to conduct horrible atrocities against civilian populations that we had to react to, right?
Right.
And that had incredible strategic implications because we had to adapt our methods to the realization that they were going to massacre the population if we didn't do something about it. And that affected timelines that MacArthur used that very effectively as argument for going back to the Philippines when he did, right? And so our whole strategic campaign reflected that reality and things like that. And I think that's one of the, from my point of view, another one of those things like you're talking about, John.
Yeah, fair.
Great question, Sean Q. You had us going there down a rabbit hole. All right, Sherwood wants to know, naval admirals wanted land forces to complete missions in as little time as possible so as not to risk naval personnel and ships. Hal and Mad Smith was their land attack dog. How much of Smith's actions were the result of culture and pressure from Nimitz and Halsey to get the job done quickly, as opposed to the Army's perception of Smith being an enter-service, is it chauvinist?
Yeah.
There you go.
Tool.
So yeah, tool is a more politically correct term. So the thing with Holland Smith is that he was a jerk, bottom line. And he was. The guy was a jerk. He was a jerk, bottom line. And yes, the Army did things differently than the Marine Corps in the Pacific in World War II. That has been shown 1,001 times. But the Army's way was no less effective than the Marine Corps' way of doing things. Quite frankly, it cost less lives than the Marine Corps way of doing things. But what was Holland Smith's actions, or were Holland Smith's actions a result, or his behavior, I guess, a result of, doctrine or no?
Just
I think he was just
a jerk.
Yeah, he was just a jerk. He was just a tool.
Nor was it a result of pressure from Nimitz. That would not have been effective on him.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah,
and it wouldn't have been Nimitz, it would have been Spruance, but no, it wouldn't have been, yeah.
He thought he knew how the war should be fought, and he was fighting it the way he thought it should be fought. It was no more complex than that.
Holland Smith was a Marine. Yeah, no, great question. But Holland Smith was a Marine Corps live or die.
Right.
I bleed red every 24 hours a day, and nobody can win this war but the Corps. And God loved the Corps.
Right.
But, he did not take into effect the way that the Army did things. And yeah, maybe there should have been a little more communication here and there. Specifically, I'm thinking Saipan, and we're all thinking Saipan. I mean, let's be real. But it was also Holland Smith who deployed the 27th Infantry Division in such a way that kind of disabled them in the middle of the entire friggin' island, because he split their forces in such a way where they could not put everything they needed into the middle of the island. And also, by the way, he gave them the worst terrain of the entire freaking island. The center of Saipan. John, you've been there. I've been there. Bill, you've been to Saipan.
I have.
The center of Saipan.
Awful.
Yeah, it's a meat grinder.
Awful.
It's a freaking meat grinder. It's like, and not that the Marines' territory was a flat parking lot, because it was not.
But they didn't have ridges on either side.
Both sides.
They weren't walking down a tunnel.
Right.
I mean, the thing is I've been critical of Ralph Smith. I personally think that he was probably not the best United States Army general that ever put on the uniform. I think he lacked a command presence, but he certainly wasn't helped by Holland Smith in any way, shape, or form. So to answer your question in a very long-winded way, no, it was just Holland Smith was just a jackass. Bottom line, because Roy Geiger does the same kind of thing, and guess what happens? Everything works fine.
All right, jackass is the answer for that question.
Yep. All day.
Richard M. from Buffalo, New York wants to know, how did wartime censorship and propaganda shape American public's perception of the escalating casualties in 1945, particularly from the battles of Manila, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and the Kamikaze attacks? And did this portrayal clash with the reality on the ground?
So, oh my goodness gracious, that
great question.
I don't want to get. Yeah, it's a fantastic question. It's 2 episodes at least.
Yeah, it is.
We've talked about this, the home front in World War II and the American side, and Japan, by the way. It's such a There's so much to unpack there. But the thing is this, is that the United States of America thought that everything was peachy keen 24 hours a day. And that war was just the biggest thing that the United States home front was concerned about was, I don't have enough gas. I can't go buy steak. And where the hell is my next ham coming from? That's all they cared about. They did not care about people in any other way. The only time they did were the big casualty rates. And this is why FDR does what he does after Tarawa. He releases those images of
Right.
who
Which are
shoots those
horrible.
images? Norm Hatch. I knew Norm. Christ, I don't know that. Norm Hatch shoots, or his people shoot those photographs of those dead Marines on Tarawa on Batio.
Yes.
And FDR says, no, we're going to release this to the public. And then when the American public sees this, they go, oh my God. And he's like, yeah, people are dying. But we're in a bunch of stupid turkeys. People are dying here. And so the American public citizenry on the home front were so completely out of touch with reality on both sides of the ocean, by the way, that anytime any warrior came home for any length of time, they were appalled at the situation on the American home front. And they literally were like, get me the hell out of here. I want to go back to the goddamn war because this place is so screwed up. They don't know what the heck's going on anywhere. And I don't want to go down too far, but just suffice it to say that the American home front was completely out of touch with anything that went on either side of the East or West Coast. And it was appalling. And the reason that high casualty rates were let loose was on purpose by the United States government to say, oh, hey, by the way, we're still in a war here. So pitch your money in and get your butts to work, and let's focus on the main goal here. Sorry. It's very touchy for me there, but anyway.
I got upbraided by my mom, who was a little girl during the war. And she was like, we were certainly aware of the fact that we didn't have enough sugar and enough, this, that, and the other thing. And yeah, she's right. But when you look at the sacrifices of the American home front vis-a-vis the sacrifices of the British home front or the Soviet home front, we have nothing to complain about.
Not a damn thing.
Yeah.
If you can't get new tires this year, guess what? You're not getting bombed.
Sorry. Right, you're not getting bombed. That's sort of the litmus test.
That whole aura of we're all in this together, which I have to say my former employer used to pump that all the time. That's a bunch of malarkey. That's completely untrue. We were not all in this together.
It's not like England or Scotland or, fill in the blank there.
Not even close, man.
All right. I have a question about the use of the fast battleships in 1944 and 1945. I have read up extensively on the activities of the Big Blue Fleet in 44 and 45. I was told by one source that Admiral Lee was hesitant to form the battleships into a battle line and attack the Japanese Navy.
He was.
I also heard that, okay, first off, is that true or false?
That is 100% true. And I know John and Bill, y'all want to comment on this too, but I'll take the lead on this, is that yes, he was. And why was he hesitant? Because they had not had the ability or time to train for nighttime or any kind of surface operations.
As a
unit, correct. He had been chasing the fast carriers for the better part of a year. And anytime they go into port, they got to rest. We've talked about this before. Anytime they go into port, they got to rest, replenish. The sailors need to, go get a smoke break, and they just did not have the time or the opportunity to train for nighttime naval gunnery. And that is partially the United States Navy at 1944 is not built to do that. Yes, we could, but that's not what we were trying to do. The Task Force 58 wasn't built to shoot it out. We were built to bomb you out. And that's the reason mainly why Willis Lee wasn't able to train. It's not that he didn't want to, he certainly did. And when the time came for him to be able to do that, he was 100% right in saying, I can't bring these people out here and expect them to not run into each other or shoot each other in the middle of a nighttime naval engagement, for which we have not trained. And Bill, you've said this a million times. You can't do it if you don't train for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's a big difference between fighting the second naval battle of Guadalcanal, where it's basically your battleship which you have trained to within a razor's edge,
Yes.
and a task force of 6 or 7, or I forget the number of fast battleships that would have been
8.
in there. 8, thank you. You know, you've got a real chance here with that big a group. You're going to have collisions and
Yes.
God knows what else.
Well,
so unit
collision
training is incredibly important in this context. And so, yeah, if I haven't been doing that sort of unit training, there's no way I want to get into a night battle. They probably could have done it. They probably could have pulled it out of their hat if they had had to, but
Right.
Willis Lee understood that from the standpoint of prudence, I don't want to have to do that if I'm not forced to.
From the standpoint of experience, he goes into Guadalcanal with only 2 freaking battleships, of which he's riding in 1.
Yeah.
And the other one trailing behind him loses communications because she shoots her own, her stuff goes haywire, obviously. And her captain just says, I'm out. And he doesn't tell anybody. So he doesn't know what the hell's going on. So his own personal experience is informing him that I've only had 2 and I really didn't know what was going on.
Now I'm going to do
not
it with
taking 8. Oh, and by the way, Washington collides with Indiana at some point in 1944 and sends Washington and Indiana back to the yard, and Indiana's CO gets relieved because
Indiana
why?
damn near sank.
Yes.
People don't realize that, but if you read the Doolin and Garsky volume on U.S. battleships, it's pretty clear that collision was almost disastrous and Indiana almost sank.
That's why he gets relieved.
Yeah.
Because he almost sinks his friggin' ship because they're maneuvering at night.
Yeah.
And he ain't paying attention. So case in point right there.
Anyway, carry on, Shawn.
All right. What do you think explains, and we've touched on this before, but just hit it from a different angle. What do you think explains the Japanese complacency in the aftermath of Coral Sea heading into Midway, such as their unwillingness to send the Shugaku and the failure to consider American air crews were skilled enough to sink the Shhhhh and damage Shukaku? Zach wants to know.
Great question.
Go ahead.
The bottom line is that at this point in the war, the Japanese have not been given a serious backhand. They look at the sinking of Shhhhh, which was a smaller unit, and they're like, okay, well, that's kind of a bummer. But the phrase that was used at the time was that the reason that Shokaku and Zuikaku had not won that engagement is because they were by far the more junior carrier division in Kyudobutai, Carrier Division 5. They'd only been brought up to speed, I forget when the commissioning time of Shokaku, I think it's September of 1941. So this is a unit that hasn't been in action all that long. So the joke was that, if the sons of lesser concubines, which is how they referred to Carrier Division 5, that the legitimate wives, which are Carrier Divisions 1 and 2, should have no problems whatsoever. The bottom line is that they view Carrier Divisions 1 and 2, which are the most experienced carrier divisions in the Japanese fleet, as being perfectly sufficient to doom any enemy that they come into contact with. And so there really isn't a lot of mental pressure on the part of the Japanese to try to reconstitute at least an air wing for Zuikaku and get her into the party. And it's sort of, in retrospect, it becomes absolutely incomprehensible. But in the mental mindset of the Japanese in mid to late May 1942, we have yet to lose. And so, given that context, if I've got my 2 best carrier divisions coming into this battle, we're going to be fine.
It's A team and B team is what it is.
A team and B team. That's a good way of putting it.
Shorthand, arrogance.
Arrogance. Yeah, victory disease. I don't want to assign victory disease as the total cause for what ends up happening at Midway. One of the things that I argue in Shattered Sword is that there's not any one variable here that dooms the Japanese. It's a whole bunch of different things that they end up screwing up, but certainly there's a level of arrogance in this Navy at this point, having just run roughshod over the Allied navies for the past 6 months, that they're extremely complacent about coming into a battle with these two really good carrier divisions. I think they're going to be peachy.
All right.
There you have it.
Good job, John. Why did the U.S. Navy, which rescued so many downed airmen, let crews of so many sunken ships, including Juno, the Leyte, Tin Cans, and Indy, drift for days and often die? For example, didn't anyone notice that the Johnsons didn't return and send a few planes to search for it? Timothy
No.
L. wants to know.
They didn't. Because what, Bill, jump in, because we've talked about this 1,000,001 friggin' times, but it's a running battle. You're talking about the battle off Samar just in and of itself. And Bill, I'll let you take Juno, because I know you're up on that one, but just off the Samar issue, that is a running gun battle. That is a running fight. Things were happening. As TASV 3's pulling out, we're getting attacked by freaking kamikazes. We didn't know what the hell that was. Were we concerned about the people that weren't there all of a sudden? Of course we were. But we were more concerned about the fact that our ships are getting hit by aircraft that have people in them, for crying out loud. And oh, by the way, the Japanese are still chasing us, god dang it. So, I mean, there's a lot of things going on. So as far as Samara is concerned, was it a travesty that people were left floating in the water for days? Yes. But you got to understand, in terms of context of the situation, there's a lot of things happening at that one time. Bill, go.
Yeah, on Juno was an error of omission and an error of commission on the part of Captain Hoover on the San Francisco. They believed
Helena.
that Helena. They believed that the torpedo the explosion was so big that it obliterated the ship, and that, quote, nobody could have survived that. So he was right to skedaddle. I mean, the submarine was in the area. I'm not going to fault him for that. So the area of omission is that he failed to report that somebody needs to search for survivors, because we had to depart the area immediately. So that's a failure. And then the error of commission was, once he got into a place where he was safe, then to make sure that a search was in progress.
Yes.
To look for those guys. The assumption was wrong. There were at least 100 people in the water, and by 10 days later, they were down to 10, and everybody else had, fallen victim to the sea or to sharks or whatever.
There you go. All right, guys. Let's see. I would like to discuss the racist nature of the Pacific War. The Japanese were cast as suicidal barbarians, and many stories appear to validate that. But Americans treated the Japanese as different, concentration camps, right or wrong from the start. Can you develop the cultural underpinnings or learned aspects of these reciprocal behaviors and how true they are? Maybe paint a more nuanced picture. This is Ray S.
All right, I'm gonna start, and then I'm gonna throw it to my two friends, because I know the Commodore has a lot to say on regards to war fighting. In order to make young men want to kill other young men, you have to demonize your enemy. And that is something that I don't think a lot of people talk about, but it's necessary. You have to demonize your enemy. You have to tell people that these are the worst human beings on the face of the planet. In whatever way you have to do that, you have to do that. And yes, this country was a very racist country in the 1930s and 40s. And to a degree, it still is today, but that's neither here nor there. In the 1940s, we never believed that the Japanese could do anything better than we could. And that killed tens of thousands of American sailors, soldiers, Marines, airmen, whatever, because of that racial arrogance. However, just to be 150% clear, the Japanese were just as racist, if not more so, than the Americans. Because they put a genocide upon the people of mainland Asia and all of them. I don't even want to get into it, because that's a whole nother conversation for another time. But they were just as racist, if not more so, than the United States. The entire world in the 1940s was a racist world. And if you don't believe that, well, I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. I don't even want to talk about Nazi Germany, but that's just the way things were. Go ahead, Bill.
Now, to some extent, it was racism, and to some extent, it was nationalism, because you could argue that Chinese are Asians just like the Japanese are, and they were killing Chinese with abandon, right? And they were Asians as well, but they would have considered themselves a different race of Asians. Let's be precise
Sure.
about this. So you want to add nuance, there's your nuance. And yeah, throughout all of human history, we've demonized the enemy. Even in our 20-year more recent war, what were the enemy? They were ragheads, right? So it's not like we stopped doing that. It's substantially less, the Hodge for short, right? And so substantially less than it used to be, yeah. And did we really believe it, or were we using it for effect? You can argue those things, but in final analysis, it doesn't matter. And certainly guys like, and I've talked about this a million times, I'm going to use your expression a million times, Seth, that, that Admiral Halsey leveraged racism
For sure.
to inspire folks to the extent that the Japanese didn't have to exaggerate about what he was saying. They could quote him verbatim.
Yeah.
They could quote the truth in their newspaper because he was really saying these things, right?
Right.
The Japanese are a race that is derived between the inbreeding between Chinese and apes. He was really saying these things.
Right.
And, and he was saying that when we're done with them, the only place the Japanese language will be spoken is in hell. They didn't have to exaggerate or embellish. He was really saying these things, and it worked against our own interests. So there was a lot of it going on. Yes, in Europe it was more nationalism. We're demonizing the Germans. The Germans were demonizing at worse.
Slavs.
But the Slavs and the Poles.
Everybody who ain't German. I mean,
exactly.
And is that? Come on, let's be clear.
but they did consider themselves a different race, an Aryan race. Sure. So, where you draw the line between racism and nationalism is really hard. John?
No, I was just I guess the only thing I would add is that the Japanese did themselves no favors with incidents like the Bataan Death March and other, the Sukching massacres that happened in Singapore after the occupation there. Having lived in Japan, and it's very difficult to trot out sort of, here are the Japanese national characteristics, but I would say that this is a society that has always defined itself as being apart from other races and nationalities, that this is a country that has always said, we're unique. We've never been conquered in our 2600. Yeah, exactly.
Samurai culture.
Yeah, the whole thing. And so it's very easy for the Japanese, I think, to look at themselves and say, well, we are homogeneous, Japanese people. We don't, we're not into outsiders. And therefore, it's easy for them to create this sort of notion of the other and act just bestially towards that other. And it happens to the Chinese. It happens to us in the case of Bataan. It happens in Southeast Asia just over and over and over again. And so the Japanese, they're shooting themselves in the foot in that they're giving guys like Halsey all sorts of ammunition to characterize them as awful people, because they did behave absolutely awfully to everybody that they came into contact with throughout Asia.
And I just want to comment. Go ahead, Bill. You were going to say something?
No, I agree with that. I don't want to make it sound like we're the only ones doing this stuff. They gave us all the ammunition we needed.
More. And I want to comment on the Halsey's comments too, is that I don't necessarily support them. However, I liken a lot of the things that Halsey said, especially, when I'm done with him, the Japanese language will only be spoken in hell. He said that, literally on December the 8th, 1941. And I liken that to a football coach. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying I liken that to a football coach trying to rile up his team. And I think that's exactly what he was trying to do to a degree. I mean,
especially when we're down at halftime.
And that's my point, is that, did a lot of things that Halsey say boomerang on us? Maybe not. But I think he was doing what the average Blue Jacket wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And in a term in 1941, specifically after Pearl Harbor, and in 1942, by the way, that's what they needed to hear. And that's what the American public needed to hear, whether right or wrong. That's what
they needed the inspiration. I just think
that's what I'm saying.
You know,
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but another method, if you know,
could he have chosen better words? Yes,
absolutely.
Right.
Because again,
in 1944, he could have.
We're talking about the people on Saipan on Suicide Cliff, right, throwing the babies over the side. You just needed to quote Halsey and quote it to those mothers. And they think that those children are not going to survive. Well, we might as well take care of it ourselves, right? You don't have to make stuff up. That's kind of my point. Don't give them the ammunition they need to want to fight harder.
Right.
That's the point.
Fair enough. Shawn.
Great.
All you, brother.
Great job, guys. Great job.
It's a very touchy subject. I just want to say that. It's a very touchy subject because you can go for days on that. And I mean, there's multiple examples of racism on both sides. And I mean, I'm not talking like 10, I'm talking like 1,000 on each side. And I'm about the most anti-racist human being you could ever possibly meet for multiple reasons. Just look at my family. But I mean, regardless of that, there's so much information that can be derived from what is being said by both sides during that war. And that whips the countries on both sides into such a frenzy that you get the bloodbath that you receive.
Right.
And, you know, I don't want to say Peleliu because that's a different animal.
Saipan,
but you say Philippine. Well, yeah, Saipan. I was going to say Philippines post.
Yeah.
Philippines post, and where it's just this, you know, ain't nobody going to be taken alive kind of a thing. And every mother's son is going to die here.
I will say that of the spots that I have visited in the Pacific, the Bonsai Cliffs in Saipan,
that's the most moving. Yeah.
I can't stand going there, honestly, even though I'm the historian that's supposed to take my guests to the spot. And every time I go there, it's
spooky.
Just gives me the willies.
It is.
Yeah. It's horrible. It's a horrible place.
It's unbelievably horrible. Anyway,
and
let's
again,
go on.
I got to say this as a guy who has a Korean wife, right? They talk about, you know, the Japanese against the Chinese, the Japanese against the Koreans, the Japanese against the Filipinos, you know, they used it with abandon. That's all I'll say.
Yeah.
Just to put a bow on this, right? It's funny that when we look at different people, we automatically, well, they're just different. Like, John, you're different than Seth and I because you're from up north. Like, you're Southern, you know, like, and I'll look at people from Alabama who are 20 miles away and I'll be like, well, you're just different, you know? So now
they are. I mean, let's be real.
Well, let's be real. They are. But if you compound that with people on the other side of the world, and I think a flashpoint for this whole thing is, you know, King, and that's a flashpoint of like, to quote back to John, like they just think they're better. They're just gonna kill with reckless abandon. We're just better for all the reasons John named, and that kind of creates this tension in the Pacific, and we'll eventually do the road to the Pacific, and you're going to get a real good education on why that all happens. So this is a good question. I'm going to finish with this one, guys. I'm going to finish this last question, and then I'm going
to I was going to go for another hour.
We're 2 hours in.
No, I got to be.
Well, actually, we're not. But
I got to be at dinner in 30 minutes. So last question.
Well, see, somebody's got to take care of the troops. The Commodore's got to be taken care of. The Cav's going to do it. All right. Can you give a general idea of what kinds of records exist for us to know, sometimes down to the minute exactly, when attacks occurred and or what damage occurred, where people are assigned, even in the heat of battle, to contemplate, to write down all these details of what is occurring? I know some of the written records, like the Japanese carrier air group data that John and Tony used brilliantly in Shattered Sword. Is it a combination of events recorded during a battle, AAR, after action reports, or people's memoirs written years later to inform us non-historians? Can you describe the types of sources used to give such amazing details on the particular event? This is from Ted. I wanted to close with this because as somebody who's written history, and obviously everybody here has, let us paint a picture of what goes into precisely putting together historical records.
Whoa. As far as AARs and deck logs are concerned, the captain's the only man that can answer that accurately. So, Bill, go.
Yeah, I mean, yes, you write down the minute. You write down the minute. You open fire. You write down. There's target logs. There's gunnery logs. There's logs on when you lit off the boilers. I mean, there's logs as you're walking around doing your safety watches. There's logs for everything. And if the ship sinks, the logs don't survive. But every time you pull in ashore, you ship the logs off, right? Maybe. You ship the logs off. There's war logs as well, right? From the battle staff, though the admiral's staff will have their versions of the logs. So yeah, there's very detailed records kept as far as where who's on watch, if they're the quartermaster of the watch and things like that. That's all recorded. Different watch stations in their logs, they'll record who is on watch. So if those records survive the war, you can go into great detail. But in a lot of cases, like the Indianapolis's final sailing, they didn't survive.
John,
right. With respect to the Japanese records, particularly for the carriers there, it's interesting because the logs, the deck logs of all four of those carriers at Midway were burned deliberately after the war. The reason that the Kotochoshos, which are the air group records, survived is because I think they were viewed by the authorities at the time as being unimportant. That these were records, mundane records of, planes going up, planes coming down, who's in the cockpit. And in some cases, those records were also used for promotional purposes that as I go through the Kotos, I can say, petty officer so-and-so, oh yeah, he's flown, 12 missions, he should be advanced to petty officer first class. So we're fortunate that the Kotochoshos survived from Midway. I would also say that unit records just in general for ground combat also can be incredibly detailed, that you find battalion records, regimental histories, divisional records as well. And all of those can be kind of sewed together. They're very dry in a lot of cases, but they will give you, down to the minute, yeah, we fired on this position or we took fire from these guys or what have you. And so that, I guess what I would say that if you look at Shattered Sword as a piece of literature, the Kotochoshos and other action records, unit records, sort of form the skeleton of the thing, but you then got to hang the narrative on top of that, and that is true for other records for ground combat units and that sort of thing as well. They give you the dry details, but now I've got to go out and interview the survivors or see the terrain or what have you to actually put together narrative structure that will paint the picture in your mind of what the hell is going on in this battle. Seth.
No, 100%. Yeah. You start with the after action reports. You start with if in the case of a naval battle, you start with the skipper's reports, the after action reports of what happened on the USS Cushing. And that's more often than not written by the skipper if he survives, or the senior surviving officer. And they're going to tell you to the best of their knowledge what they saw. And that gives you the bones. That gives you the absolute bare bones of what you need to construct when you're talking about the naval battle of Guadalcanal. And then you take the oral histories from the people that survive, which I hate to say this, but when it comes to naval vessels in particular, a lot of the times the Blue Jackets oral histories are not the most reliable sources.
Thank you.
They're not. They're not.
You have to understand that these sailors are seeing this war through a soda straw.
Maybe.
That's right.
Maybe. If they're down below decks, if they're in the bowels of the ship, they're not seeing squat, Jack. Right. They're just relaying to you 60 odd years later what they were told. Now, if they're a 1.1 gunner on the Atlanta, well then yeah, they probably saw a lot of things go
Some
down.
things.
But if they're stoking the boiler on the Atlanta, no, they don't know. And so
The other thing that you'll find too with a lot of those, I'm sorry to interrupt, Seth,
no, that's okay. Okay.
that a lot of firsthand survivors' accounts, you have to parse them very, very carefully because there are
Yes.
things like the telescoping of time.
Yes.
In many cases, events get put into the wrong sequential order, and
Yes.
when they put it down,
when they put it down,
or
right?
when they think they put it down,
right. So you always have to take into account, okay, this dude that's talking to me about what he thinks he saw. Where was he on that ship? Really, what
yes,
was his
1000%?
What would have been his field of view, his physical field of view? If I know that
1000%.
if this dude is the rear turret, the gun captain for Mountain Number 4 on a Fletcher class destroyer, I know for sure he can't tell me what the hell is ahead of my ship because he couldn't see it physically.
Right.
That's right.
So there's just all of these things that you cannot take these first person survivors accounts, as valuable as they are, you can't take them verbatim because they don't have a context, for what it is that they saw. They can only see their soda straw set.
From someone who's done hundreds and hundreds and
Way
hundreds
more
of
than
oral
me.
histories, the only thing you can take from those personal accounts is what happened to that person.
Right.
I jumped off the Oklahoma at this time ish.
Right.
And then
Ish.
I did this and I did this and then this happened. Cool. Well,
Yeah.
what happened over here? You never ask anybody that because they don't know. They don't have a telescopic eyeball. They can't see what's happening on the other side of the ship. Exactly to your point. I'm backing up 100% is that unfortunately, I hate to say it, but officers' accounts are generally more accurate
Right.
because they're more informed. They're better informed as to what is going on at that time. Even if they are the engineering officer and they're in the bowels of the Atlanta, they're getting comms, maybe, and they're hearing what's going down. Whereas Joe Smith, who's stoking the boiler, you don't know what the hell's going on.
Right.
You don't know squat. So you have to take all of that to shorten this long-winded answer. You have to triangulate everything, and you have to take the 50 pieces of information and craft it into 4 pieces, if you will.
Right.
The overall situation, the ship situation, the officer situation, and this guy may be seeing this kind of situation.
Right.
And there's a lot to do, and it's not easy, frankly. And you have to be able to decipher the real stuff from I don't want to say baloney because it isn't, but from what I think happened.
Right.
Human memory is malleable.
Well, I think Seth just hit on the head. There's really 2 things to kind of sum this up. There's 2 things actually happening. The first thing you're doing is you're getting your hands on as much possible information about said event as possible.
Yes.
And then once that information is all gathered and you've sifted through all that, now you have to come up with what happened in your head, and you have to base that off of each actual thing you've come up with. And what Seth said about triangulate, because sometimes you'll be like, this guy said one thing and this guy says, and they're completely different. Well, what vantage point? Well, they were both enlisted, but this lieutenant was up on the bridge, and then he'd have a better. So you have to You have to go through that. So 100%. It's gathering, and then it's piecing the puzzle together.
It's a detective. It's detective work is what it is.
At FSU history, we said it's basically you're trying to solve a murder 300 years ago, get all the evidence, and tell us who killed them. I mean, that's how you're putting together the story. So
this is one thing I want to give a shout out to my co-author, Tony Tully, that this is one of the things that made Shattered Sword the book that it is, if whatever it is. Tony has this incredible ability to be able to take 20 or 30 different first-person accounts and pull them all apart and then re-synthesize them, which is exactly what you're talking about, Shawn. And saying, John, don't you understand? This dude is seeing this from this side and this, light bulb. Okay, I'll go write that.
And that's why it's so important to figure out where guys were.
Right.
And
just because you were on the San Francisco doesn't mean you're an authority.
And the time, and what time it was. What time did you see that?
Yeah.
You know?
Speaking of temporal factors too, one of the points that Tony has always made to me that I think is incredibly important is that if you have a series of first-person accounts, Ensign George Gay is one of the classic examples from Midway, okay, right?
Yeah.
I've got, 3 or 4 different accounts of what George Gay says he thinks he saw. Tony is like always err towards the first account because that's usually the one that was given immediately after the action
100%.
and before he starts to believe other things that may have been told to him by other people
later.
Bill was talking about this on the Indianapolis episode with all the sharks.
Bill, give you credit. You did an excellent job of explaining how history makes you start viewing things a lot differently than the actual reality.
Yep. And
there's a lot to it.
When I go back to George Gay, I want to see, okay, what did he tell the dudes, immediately after he was hauled out of the drink on June 8th or whatever the hell it was.
That's the most accurate account.
Right.
Bingo. That's what he says. As opposed to what were the stories that he was making up when he was out on a war bond tour in the U.S. and he knows that the more dramatic that story becomes, the more beer he's going to get and the more nurses he's got. I shouldn't even say that.
100%. No, but you're 100% right. And I'm not, I agree with you 100%. George Gay was there.
Yes.
There's no question. He was shot down. His gunner was
his
killed.
Grandson is going to be super pissed off about this because he camps his grandfather's page on Wikipedia like a lion over a dead wildebeest. But in any case, the truth of the matter is that the
guy was there. He was a badass for being there and surviving.
He saw things, he heard things, but there is no way in hell that you will ever convince me that George Gay had a ringside seat for the bombing of Kitabutai, because I know
not a chance
from the operational records the Kitabutai had moved at least a dozen miles to the north, and your viewpoint from sea level 0 sitting underneath your flotation device.
I could do that
can't
calculation.
Even see those carriers. Anyway,
you can see 6 miles. It depends on the masthead height of the.
I appreciate you, Bill Tody, former submarine commander.
Appreciate that, Bill.
Anyway,
so
nor was George Gay the sole survivor of Torpedo 8 that Ernest would have had, and Harry Ferrier would have had something to say something about that.
Yes. Anyway,
but that's neither.
And with that being said, the cavalry is giving up the con.
Very good.
Right. So Seth, before we exit this episode, I just want to go through a few incredible statistics. Would you be okay with that?
Let it rip, Captain.
This is like, I think we've got 164 published episodes as we are recording this one. I think we have 4 in the queue. This will make 168-ish. And since we started this journey, Seth, 168 episodes, God help me, they run about 2 hours each, right? We have spent something like 340 hours behind the camera, sitting on these seats, just being recorded. That doesn't include all the time preparing and editing.
No, it does not.
You could triple that number, Bill. Triple that number.
Triple. Times 5. So we're talking like 1,000 hours we spent on this, folks. And I know you enjoy it, and that's why we do it. Our number 1 market is the United States. Our number 2 market is Australia. Thank you, Aussies.
Thank you, Aussies.
Yeah,
we love y'all.
We love the Aussies.
That's Dave Holland. That's Dave. He's just watching our show on repeat
over and over and over again.
Thank you, Dave.
We love you, Dave.
Our number 3 market is Canada. So the 51st state comes in number 3, and our number 4 market is the United Kingdom. And thank you. Thank you.
That's Mike Whitby, by the way. Mike is watching our stuff
over and over and over again. Yeah. And number 5 is the Philippines. 95% of our viewers are male, 5% female. We'd like to get that number up. And I guess
females.
Yeah. So that's kind of interesting. And
Multiple.
this will not surprise you. The number one age group are the people that are retired and have the time to spend watching 2-hour episodes. So over 65 is
Right.
the
job, Bill.
yeah.
We need to
So
get the
we've-
younger generation involved, Bill.
We do, yeah. So we have over 10 million views, Seth, and God help me, people have spent over 5 million hours watching us.
How
Wow.
many of these have I done with you? Like
a lot.
third,
Yeah, a lot.
maybe?
I don't know.
Like too
I
many.
don't
More
know,
than
a
that.
lot.
Too many.
More than that.
Yeah, too
A
many.
lot.
John,
That's
go
a
write
lot.
another book, John.
More than half.
No, I don't know. I don't know. But I will say this. As we close up season 4, we've had a lot of guests on the show, from Admiral Cox to Admiral Tom Fargo, from former Sink Pack, for crying out loud, and John Bruning and John McManus, who's a great friend,
Rich Frank.
and Rich and James Scott, and all these
Yes.
amazing people who are like genuine friends, and they're good dudes.
Dave
And-
Holland.
Dave, God, how could I forget Dave? Dave's
I
gonna
can't forget.
send me a really nasty message, but yeah, no, of course, Dave. But I think everybody knows that the triumvirate here is the we have a chemistry that just kind of flows, and it's awesome, and it's genuine. It really is. I mean, yes, do we send out notes before each episode? Not this one,
No.
but do we send
None.
out notes before each episode?
Zero.
These questions were cold. But do we send out notes for each episode? Yeah. And do we collaborate on the notes? Yeah. But I mean, 99% of the time, the conversation is genuine, and the chemistry is genuine, and it shows, because you're hanging out with your buddies and you're doing really cool stuff, and you're talking about things that I don't necessarily want to say enjoy, but you enjoy talking about it, and that's why we're here. But in terms of closing season 4, this was a long one. I never thought we would do 42 episodes for season 4, which covers 1945. Good gracious, God Almighty!
Yep.
And there is so much more to talk about. And no, the show ain't over, and we're going to continue to go. But I do want to say this, because this factors into the things that you're going to see, the placeholder episodes that you're going to see in the next 2-3 weeks. We've done this in the past. I've done this in the past. I've taken episodes that are like part 1, part 2, and sandwiched them together. You're going to see that for our EWO stuff. I'm also going to show a couple of documentary films that are going to come through. I know you can probably look at them elsewhere, but you know what? Look at them here, because you know what? We're cool. And next season, aside from doing the topical conversations that we always do, we're going to do something, and we're going to experiment with it, where we're going to dissect archival footage. I have an enormous, and I kid you not, over 958 reels of archival footage in my collection. And it's not all of us, but it's a lot of it is. And it's awesome. And I think it would just be totally rad to sit there and go through and say, look, this is, as best we can, this is Jon Parshall, this is Shawn Bergstrom, and they're about to assault blah, and do that kind of thing. And this is the Enterprise, and this is right before Midway, and this is the date is X. And I think that would just be really cool, and people would eat that up, and it'd be fun. So we're gonna do some of that as we go along, and we're gonna experiment with it and find the right template for that. So bear with us when we do that.
Schlock.
And we will. So to break the news, to we're having a baby, and it is going to be the Battle of the Atlantic, but it's going to be after season 5. So don't expect anything before.
Yeah, that's all good. Thank you for having me. I've always enjoyed being here. This is a great time.
It's always great fun. Always great fun.
No,
Shawn,
I just want to tell everybody that I appreciate it. I think the most important thing I could say, and I think all 3 of you guys would agree, that not only is it the memory of these men, but it's actually you guys out there that listen to it, that
thank you, audience.
Make it worth it. I mean, I remember Seth talking about this years ago, about this idea he had with his buddy, the Commodore, to do this, and you all breathe life. Breathe life into this podcast, and I get to eyewitness it with all these stories and these veteran stories and these great questions and these great recommendations. So to the audience, you guys are what make this all happen.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank
We
you.
love you
Thank
guys, all of us.
Right.
So is everybody cool? Are we done?
We're
Let's do
done.
it.
And I'm late for
All right.
dinner.
Yeah.
Oh,
Let's
good.
go.
Well, then go. With that, we want to thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. Where please give us a rating and review wherever you receive your podcast, blah, blah, blah. If you got a question or comment, send us an email at unauthorizedpacificpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, my name is Seth Parrott, and I want to thank you very much for listening. John, thank you for being with us. Shawn, thank you for being with us. Bill, bring us home. Goodbye. Go to lunch.
See you next
Dinner.
week. I'm going to dinner.
Bye.